Before God uses you, He allows you to carry this alone. There are seasons when the weight you carry feels strangely solitary, not because you refused help, and not because others abandon you, but because no one else seems able to touch what you're holding. You try to explain it, but the words fall short. You look around and realize that even in rooms full of people, this burden rests on you alone. And the quiet question forms in your heart: why would God let me carry this by myself? Scripture reveals a truth that is rarely spoken plainly before God uses someone. He often allows them to carry certain burdens alone, not because He is distant, but because He is intentional. There are weights God does not distribute to crowds. There are pressures He does not share publicly. Some burdens are entrusted privately, not to punish you, but to shape you in ways that cannot happen any other way. This kind of loneliness feels different from abandonment. It is heavier, more focused. You sense that what you're carrying matters, even if you don't fully understand it yet. You pray, and God doesn't remove the weight, but He sustains you beneath it. You ask for relief, and instead of release, you receive endurance. That can feel confusing, even painful, especially when you've been faithful and expected support. But God knows that certain depths of character, authority, and dependence are formed only when the soul learns how lean on Him without substitutes. When encouragement is limited, when explanations are scarce, when human strength reaches its limit. In those moments, God is not absent. He is teaching you how to stand with Him alone. You may wonder why others seem lighter while your life feels heavier. Why responsibilities, convictions, or emotional pressures settle on you more intensely. But weight is not randomly assigned. God does not give deep burdens to shallow roots. He entrusts them to lives He intends to grow strong enough to carry responsibility without being crushed by it. If you've been carrying something quietly, something others don't see, don't understand, or can't help with, this message is not meant to tell you to endure silently. It's meant to explain why this season exists. Because before God uses a life, He often allows it to be strengthened under burdens that must be carried alone. And those burdens, though unseen, are shaping you for something that will one day require everything God is forming in you. Number 1. The burden of being misunderstood. One of the first burdens God allows you to carry alone before He uses you is the burden of being misunderstood. This is not simply being disagreed with, it is being misread. Your intentions are questioned. Your obedience is interpreted as pride or distance. Your restraint is seen as weakness, and the more carefully you try to explain yourself, the clearer it becomes that words cannot bridge the gap. This burden cuts deeply because it touches identity. You know your heart. You know why you made certain choices. You know what God asked of you. And yet, those closest to you may draw conclusions that don't reflect the truth. God allows this burden not to harden you, but to anchor you. Because when your sense of self depends on being understood, obedience becomes fragile. Scripture shows us that many whom God used were misunderstood long before they were trusted. They were misjudged, mischaracterized, and sometimes dismissed. God allows this because misunderstanding strips away the need for human approval. It teaches you how to obey without explanation and to stand without validation. Carrying this burden alone teaches you restraint. You learn when to speak and when silence is safer. You learn that defending yourself too quickly can dilute obedience. And slowly, your confidence shifts from needing people to understand you to trusting that God already does. If you've been carrying the pain of being misunderstood, resist the urge to correct every assumption. God may be teaching you how to let Him define you. When He uses someone, He often does so through a life that has learned how to stand steady, even when misrepresented. Misunderstanding refines your loyalty. It clarifies who you are serving. And though it feels lonely, It prepares you to carry authority without being controlled by perception. God allows this burden because it forms strength that does not depend on being seen correctly, only on being aligned faithfully. Number 2, the burden of silent responsibility. Another burden God allows you to carry alone before He uses you is the burden of silent responsibility. This is a weight of knowing what must be done without being able to share it fully. You see consequences others don't see. You feel urgency others don't feel, and you carry awareness that cannot be delegated or discussed freely. This burden is exhausting because it offers little relief. There is no applause for responsibility carried quietly, no reassurance when decisions must be made without consensus. God allows this burden because leadership is not formed through popularity. It is formed through responsibility carried in solitude. Scripture reveals that God often entrusts responsibility privately before He assigns authority publicly. He allows you to carry weight without recognition so that obedience is tested before influence arrives. Silent responsibility trains you to act with integrity even when no one is watching. In this season, you may feel pressure without permission to explain it. You may be asked to wait while loading answers, to stay faithful while others remain unaware of the cost. That loneliness is not a mistake. God is teaching you how to bear responsibility without resentment and without needing affirmation. If you've been carrying decisions, convictions, or responsibilities that no one else seems to notice, understand this: God sees it all. He allows this burden because it builds endurance and discernment. It teaches you to move carefully, prayerfully, and humbly. God uses people who have learned how to carry weight without broadcasting it. Silent responsibility forms trustworthiness. And when the time comes for God to use you openly, the weight will feel familiar because you've already been carrying it quietly with Him. Number 3, the burden of delayed relief. One of the most difficult burdens God allows you to carry alone before He uses you is the burden of delayed relief. This is not the absence of prayer. It is prayer offered faithfully without immediate response. You've asked God for release, clarity, or change, and instead of relief, the weight remains. Time stretches, hope strains, and you begin to realize that endurance, not escape, is being required of you. This burden is especially painful because it tests trust at its deepest level. When relief is delayed, the mind begins to search for explanations. You wonder if you missed something, misunderstood God, or failed in some unseen way. But Scripture shows us that delay is not always correction. Sometimes it is conditioning. God allows relief to wait because He is strengthening what must last. Delayed relief forms patience. That is not passive. It teaches the heart to remain steady when nothing changes. It deepens faith beyond emotion and anchors it in commitment. God is not ignoring your cries. He is enlarging your capacity. He knows that the weight you will one day carry requires endurance that cannot be learned quickly. Carrying this burden alone is exhausting because others may assume you've moved on. They don't feel the ache you still wake up with. They don't sense the weighting that presses on your spirit. And yet God stays near, not by removing the burden, but by sustaining you beneath it. If you are in a season where relief has not come despite obedience, do not interpret delay as denial. God may be preparing you to carry responsibility without needing constant reassurance. Delayed relief teaches you how to trust God's presence, not just His answers. God uses people who have learned how to endure without relief becoming their requirement for faithfulness. And the burden of waiting, though lonely, builds a strength that immediate answers never could. Number 4, the burden of obedience without applause. Another burden God allows you to carry alone before He uses you is the burden of obedience without applause. This is the quiet faithfulness that goes unseen. The obedience that costs you something but earns you nothing in return. Not recognition, not gratitude, not acknowledgement. You do what God asks, and life remains ordinary. Sometimes harder, sometimes quieter. This burden is heavy because obedience feels invisible. There is no feedback to confirm that you are doing the right thing. No reassurance from others that your sacrifices matter. And yet Scripture shows us that God values obedience long before he ever rewards it publicly. God allows this burden because applause can corrupt motive. If it comes too soon. If obedience is fueled by recognition, it will eventually weaken under pressure. So God teaches you to obey when no one notices, to choose faithfulness without validation, to serve without being celebrated. Carrying this burden alone forces an honest question: would I still obey if nothing ever came from it? And when you continue anyway, something is formed in you that cannot be faked: integrity. Obedience becomes an act of worship rather than performance. You may feel overlooked in this season. You may wonder if your quiet obedience matters at all. But God sees what others miss. He weighs faithfulness differently than the world does. And he often prepares his servants in obscurity, so that when visibility comes, it does not distort their devotion. If you've been obeying God without applause, without affirmation, without reward, do not grow weary. God is not ignoring your faithfulness. He is purifying it. And obedience formed in silence becomes a foundation that can carry influence without being ruined by it. Number 5. The burden of emotional isolation. One of the heaviest burdens God allows you to carry alone before he uses you is emotional isolation. This is not the absence of people. It is the absence of understanding. You may be surrounded by others and still feel unseen. Conversations continue. Responsibilities remain. But the inner weight you carry has no place to rest. You realize that even those who care for you cannot fully enter what you're holding. This burden is painful because it exposes the limits of human connection. You want to be understood, to be comforted, to feel accompanied. But God allows emotional isolation because there are depths of formation that cannot happen in shared spaces. Certain parts of the soul must learn how to be held by God alone. Scripture shows us that God often draws his servants into seasons where emotional support thins, not to wound them but to deepen their dependence. When emotional isolation settles in, you begin to pray differently, less performative, more honest. You stop searching for words to explain yourself and start letting God see what you cannot articulate. This isolation also reveals where your comfort truly comes from. When others cannot carry you emotionally, you learn whether God himself is enough. That realization is not easy. It can feel frightening, but it is also anchoring. God is teaching you to receive strength from his presence rather than from constant reassurance. If you've felt emotionally alone lately, unable to fully share what you're carrying, do not assume something is wrong. God may be forming intimacy with you that cannot be mediated through people. He is teaching your heart how to remain steady even when emotional support is limited. God uses people who have learned how to stand emotionally anchored in him. Emotional isolation forms resilience without hardness, depth without bitterness, and though it feels lonely, this burden is shaping a soul that can carry others one day without losing itself. Number 6. The burden of discernment. Others don't have. Another burden God allows you to carry alone before he uses you is the burden of discernment. Others do not share. You see consequences before they arrive. You sense danger where others feel excitement. You recognize compromise where others see opportunity. And this awareness isolates you, not because you are superior, but because responsibility often separates before it unites. This burden is difficult because discernment creates tension. You cannot always explain what you see without sounding negative or fearful. You may feel pressured to go along with decisions you cannot support in good conscience. God allows this burden because discernment is not meant to make life easier, it is meant to make life safer. Scripture shows us that discernment often precedes leadership. God sharpens perception in solitude so that obedience becomes internal, not dependent on agreement. You learn how to trust God's prompting even when no one else affirms it. That kind of faith cannot be taught, it must be lived. Carrying this burden alone can feel frustrating. You may feel misunderstood or dismissed, but God is training you to carry responsibility without consensus. He is teaching you how to stand firm without becoming rigid, and how to remain humble without ignoring what He has shown you. If you felt burdened by insight others don't seem to carry, resist the urge to doubt yourself prematurely. God may be entrusting you with awareness because He plans to trust you with influence later. Discernment is weighty because it shapes decisions that affect more than just you. God uses people who have learned how to carry discernment responsibly, and the burden of seeing clearly before others do, though isolating, forms wisdom that protects lives, futures, and calling. Number 7. The burden that teaches you to lean on God alone. The final burden God allows you to carry alone before He uses you is the burden that brings you to the end of human strength. This is the moment when support systems, explanations, and coping mechanisms no longer sustain you. You have tried everything you know how to try. You have prayed, endured, adjusted, and waited, and still the weight remains. Not to crush you, but to teach you something essential. God allows this burden because there are depths of dependence that cannot be learned, while alternatives remain. As long as something else can carry you, you will lean on it. So God gently and sometimes painfully removes substitutes. What remains is not emptiness. It is invitation, an invitation to lean fully on Him. This burden changes your prayer life. You stop asking God to fix everything and start asking Him to hold you. Your faith becomes less about answers and more about presence. You discover that God is not only the one who delivers, but the one who sustains. And that realization alters the foundation of your life. Carrying this burden alone is frightening because it exposes vulnerability. You realize how fragile you are, how limited your control has always been. But it is also freeing, because once you stop pretending you can carry everything, you allow God to carry you. And in that exchange, strength flows differently, quietly, steadily, faithfully. Scripture shows us that God uses people who know their dependence. Not those who appear strong, but those who have learned how to lean without shame. This kind of dependence produces humility, compassion, and authority that does not dominate, it serves. If you are at a point where only God can hold you, do not interpret that as failure. It may be the most important formation of your life. God is anchoring you in Him, so that when He uses you, you will not draw strength from applause, support, or success, but from His presence alone. God uses people who have learned how to lean, and the burden that teaches you dependence is often the final preparation before a life is entrusted with sacred responsibility. Conclusion: God never allows a burden without purpose. If this message has spoken to you, let this truth settle deeply into your heart. God never allows a burden without purpose. The weight you have been carrying alone is not a sign of abandonment. It is evidence of intention. God has not overlooked you. He has been shaping you quietly, faithfully, and deliberately. Every burden you carried alone has formed something within you. Misunderstanding refined your loyalty. Silent responsibility built endurance. Delayed relief strengthened trust. Obedience without applause purified motive. Emotional isolation deepened intimacy. Discernment sharpened wisdom, and dependence anchored your soul in God Himself. You were not meant to carry these burdens forever. You were meant to be shaped by them. God allows certain weights because He sees what they will produce. He knows that a life that has learned how to carry burden without bitterness can carry authority without corruption. If you have felt alone, heavy, or unseen, do not rush to escape this season. Ask instead what God is forming within you. The burden may not lift yet, but it is not meaningless. God is preparing you to be used in ways that require depth, compassion, and strength that cannot be borrowed from others. Take a moment to honor what you have endured, not with pride, but with gratitude. God has been near in every unseen moment, and when He does use your life, the burdens you once carried alone will become the source of wisdom, humility, and grace for others. If this message helped you see your season differently, share it with someone who is quietly carrying weight they don't know how to explain. And if you want more messages that speak honestly about formation, calling, and God's quiet work, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Before God uses someone, He often allows them to carry burdens alone, not to break them, but to build them.